Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Wow. Thanks to you, my new book launched as an Amazon bestseller. Let's keep the momentum going. Cultivate Positive Culture, 10 Actions to Faithful Living is now available for purchase. As a listener to the Charge Podcast, I would love for you to get a copy of the book. You can go where you purchase books, or better yet, go to my site and order the book directly from us. And I will give you free shipping and handling since you are helping us with sharing our message to others. Just go to cultivatepositiveculture.com to get your copy today. Thanks for supporting the Charge Podcast by purchasing the book directly from us. Remember, all the details about ordering is at chargepodcast.com, where Chris does a great job of sharing all the notes about the upcoming podcast. Check them out. At the end of this podcast, I will share a brief excerpt from the book. Are you frustrated and stressed out with your professional and personal life? The Charge Podcast will help you get recharged. We are in the last 2 months of 2020. Our guest list in November, we found some interesting people who will share their journey to finding charge each day in business and life. Make sure to listen each week and see how you can apply the lessons they share with the Chargers in your own life. The goal of the Charge Podcast is to help you realize what is most important to your life. Chargers are committed to finding how each day they can make their life better by the willingness to learn, grow, and become the person they were meant to be. I think this quote I coined in my new book, Cultivate Positive Culture. Your purpose defines you, guides you, and allows you to become the person God created you to be. You made a great choice in listening to this podcast. Remember, the podcast is named Charge after my mantra, create habits around real goals every day. Let's get recharged in this podcast to influence a positive culture in your life each day. Welcome, Chargers. We're glad to have you back again this week for another great podcast. I'm so glad you decided to join us today and learn a new thing that you can take action on. That becomes the real key. And today I've got an interesting to really give you some thoughts of how you need to change and maybe your thought leadership of what you want it to be. Because Peter Winick is the founder and CEO of Thought Leadership Leverage. For the past 2 decades, he's helped individuals and organizations build and grow revenue streams through designing and growing their thought leadership platforms, as well as acting as a guide and advisor for increasing business-to-business sales of thought leadership products. His clients come from a diverse set of backgrounds and specialties. They include New York Times bestselling business book authors, members of the Speakers Hall of Fame, recipients of the Thinkers 50 Award, CEOs of public and privately held companies, and academics at prestigious institutions such as Yale, Wharton, Dartmouth, and London School of Business. Peter has built his career in thought leadership leverage to serve the needs of these individuals and others like them. Specifically, he uses his entrepreneurial experience and spirit along with the passion for using relationships to leverage growth. He uses a combination of art, science, logic, focus, passion, and creativity to transform a thought leader's great ideals into a platform and practice so they can effectively reach business leaders and executives to serve them the tools that their organizations need. Peter, it is great to have you on the Charge Podcast. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Gary. Appreciate it.
Well, I am looking forward to the conversation, but if you would, I have a mantra called Charge, create habits around real goals every day. And I ask every guest right away this question: what habit or habits led to success in your life?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say 2. I think one is being a life learner. So I'm constantly, I can't get enough, whether it's podcasts, books, audio, newspapers, actual physical news. Like, I can't get enough information because it's almost insatiable. And then the other side, I think, I don't know if it's more of a habit or a trait, is sort of some combination between grit and persistence.
Yeah, great ones. And I can tell the one piece of it that you're a great learner, because Peter and I are on video so we can see each other, but his library's behind him and he's got them stacked full of books back there. So it doesn't end. I understand that. Well, Peter, I think a great place to start, because I definitely want to get into thought leadership and your thoughts on that. But I think one of the things is, what got you to the process of where you're at now? Because I think that helps our audience understand we didn't just become this person. It's transpired over that time. So can you share a little bit of that story?
So, happy to. So I'm a consultant, so I think like consultants. So if you think about it in terms of a Venn diagram, I found the overlap in two circles that I thought were distinct and separate. But what I came to realize maybe 15 years ago, or a little bit less, that there's a place where they overlap. And in that overlap is where awesome things happen and where I need to be. So the two pieces were, one circle was sort of entrepreneurial businesses, loving to build businesses, grow businesses, buy businesses, sell businesses, fix businesses, all that sort of fun stuff. And then the other circle, which I thought, again, was a totally separate, clear boundary, don't touch one with the other, it sort of connects to what I just said earlier, is this lifelong learning passion for thought leadership. And we didn't even call it thought leadership then, just taking in thoughtful content and information in ways that are useful and applicable. And then I realized through a set of circumstances where I got brought in to do a turnaround at a company that was a corporate communications consulting firm, presentation skills, etc. I'm like, wait a minute, that company is broken. We need to fix it. Its basic asset is the intellectual property that came out of a book that the founder started 40 years ago. Holy cow. Because it never occurred to me to think about all these books I've read and all these thought leaders I followed and all these speakers I like. How do they make a living? I didn't really care. I paid my $20, $25 for a book. I read the book, took out a bit what I thought would be valuable to me, and didn't really give it much thought. And then once I did, I'm like, wow, that's awesome. That's really cool, because all of the skills and the chops I developed as an entrepreneur could be applied to something I was really more passionate about. And, fast forward, 15 years and a bunch of gray hairs later, and here we are.
Yeah. And that's an interesting, because what happens is, I don't think people realize where they're at today doesn't mean where they'll be tomorrow. And I'm not meaning literally, but down the road of what changes, but you have to be open to see it. And I think that's an interesting part. And I think a good part for us to start, because thought leadership is seeing things differently than other people are seeing it at the time. So share with me, for you, as far as your definition, when we think of thought leadership, what is it?
So let me give you a couple disclaimers and then I'll answer it. So one is, it's become a term that is somewhat overused and used somewhat thoughtlessly, right? So typically, if we were to use a term, sales, marketing, leadership, we might not have an exact, if I were to say to you, hey, Gary, let's have a conversation around your leadership style. Even though we might not be 100%, we know what we're talking about, right? Plus or minus 5 or 10%. The problem with thought leadership is, because it's been thrown about so much and people don't really process the context of what it means, you could be talking about thought leadership and I can be talking about it. And if someone overheard the conversation, they're like, those two guys aren't talking to each other, they're talking at each other. So I think, number one, it's important to get clear around what the definition is. The definition I tend to use is two things. You break thought leadership apart into two elements. There's the thoughtful piece, right? So what is it about what you're putting out in the world that's really thoughtful? And thoughtful could be derived from research. It could be derived from academia. It could be derived from real life, sort of case studies, clients that you work with, things that you do, something that you've connected to disciplines in a way that are a little bit different. And then the leadership piece is, are you willing, do you have the courage, do you have what it takes to lead that conversation to a new level, to take it to a different place, which means that maybe everyone doesn't agree with you. Maybe some people actually disagree with you. Maybe you're wrong, right? So I think it's the thoughtfulness and the courage to lead, because a lot of people put stuff out there that is not thoughtful. That's called thoughtless,
Yeah.
Or cut and paste or sharing. And there's a time and place to share things I read and enjoy with someone else, but that's not necessarily thoughtful. It's kind of lazy. And then leadership, unless you're just putting it out there going, yes, pasting a quote out there from, famous people or whatever, interesting. There might be a market for that, but it's not leadership. And it's quite frankly, it's followership. So I think, the other way to define thought leadership is by what it's not, which is thoughtless followership. And I think there are a lot of people that confuse the two, and they're very, very, very different.
Yeah. Yeah. And I loved how you talked about in the very beginning. It's just like what happened in your life. It's really about getting that overlapping in the Venn diagram. Is where is that overlap where you are different, because everything's not brand new that's out, but it's how we're looking at it and we're bringing out differently. And then are we willing, like you said, the courage to lead that conversation and take it to a different direction? And there's going to be people that will disagree with you, but that's a benefit to you versus just a negative side. So I think the thing that I really want to move towards is the value of that thought leadership, because in our world, things are changing rapidly. We've seen it this year for sure. 2020 has been a very interesting year. So what becomes the value of that thought leadership for the people that's creating it?
Yeah. So let me chunk that out into a couple of different levels. So the real question is, why would I bother? Why would I invest in this? Why would I invest my time, my energy, my resources? One reason could be intellectual curiosity, intrinsic, etc. And that's all fine and dandy, right? But when it comes down to businesses making investments, time, energy, effort, money, opportunity cost, I think it needs to be more than intrinsic, right? So if you break it down at an individual level, I should be investing in thought leadership because it gets me to stand out from the crowds, right? So if I'm hiring someone, I'm going to hire a head of marketing, a head of sales, a head of whatever, and I look at Gary's resume and say, wow, that guy's really smart. He's got years of experience, exactly what I'm looking for. But then there's this other guy, Fred, and Fred's got everything Gary does, but Fred comes along with a ton of thought leadership. He's been writing, he's been blogging, he's whatever. As an employer, I'm like, I know exactly what this guy stands for, what he thinks about, how he thinks. I could agree, I could disagree. And I'm kind of getting all that for free. Why wouldn't I want that in a tiebreaker, right? So I think at an individual level, it's a great boost to the career. Most importantly, and we do most of our work, is at the B2B level, at the business level, there's two reasons to make investments in thought leadership. Number one is indirect monetization. So, listen, I don't care what business you're in, we are all being commoditized at a speed far greater than we'd like to admit. There is a race for downward pressure. There's probably not much that you do or I do that somebody can't claim to do cheaper, better, quicker, faster, either here or overseas or whatever. So I think the non-direct monetization of thought leadership it's a way for your brand to stand out, right? And ultimately that's level one. Level two is it's a way to attract net new clients, right? So think about if you're a consultant for small businesses, there are 1,000, if not 10,000 others, just as good, just as smart, just as qualified as you are, right? So if I could use my thought leadership to attract the type of things I want, it's a tiebreaker. And then ultimately, if I get sophisticated enough, I could actually use it as the worm on the hook to attract the type of clients I want in the industries I want and gives me the outcomes that I want with them. So that would be the first piece. The other piece, which is a majority of our clients, is they are directly monetizing their thought leadership. So these are professionals that have top level thought leadership. They're authors, they're speakers, they're thought leaders, etc. And now they look to monetize that directly. To your point on COVID and this year being not just a pivot, but whiplash times 10, and we don't, and it ain't over yet, right? Traditionally, thought leaders have been able to make money as consultants, as keynote speakers, as advisors and such. And, when the brakes hit on travel, and if you were, for example, a keynote speaker that was speaking 50 times a year, time to reinvent. And the reality is you have to rethink your content, your thought leadership. Is it still in vogue? Is it still relevant? And then number two is the modality, right? So how do I create value for the people that love my content if we can't all be in a room in Las Vegas in, April or whatever the case is?
Yeah, I think that becomes the real key. And you've got some great points there of it's about monetization. And the thing I think I want to bring it back to is for someone that's sitting there and they're saying, well, I don't know if this conversation fits me, it fits everything, because it's really about what you want in life and what you're moving forward. So if you're a business owner, you have to look at your business differently. I mean, if you haven't had to do that already this year, you're very, very fortunate. That's all I can say, because the majority of people have had to pivot, like you said. Well, thought
Well,
leaders.
let me just add to that, Gary. So there's, on the one hand, in many instances, all that COVID did from a business perspective, I'm not minimizing the health and people have lost their, like, that's all different piece.
Sure.
All it did was accelerate some of the inevitable things that were already happening, but it accelerated them like rocket ship level. Like, working from home is not a new concept. Working remotely, not a new concept. Learning remotely, not a new concept. Doing all these, education online, not a new concept. But all these things immediately on 48 hours notice, holy crap. And I think that's the shocker.
Yeah. I think for someone that maybe hasn't really thought leadership as for themselves, where would you tell me that I should start? Because if I'm one of these, I'm hearing the conversation, I hear what you're saying. Of course, I share with my team, because I may be that business owner and I have that thought leadership that I'm sharing with them. How do I get started really kind of putting the pieces together?
Yeah, so the way I would start, if we're at sort of ground zero, if you will, is starting backwards. Start with the end in mind. What are the goals? What am I trying to achieve? And it could be, on the one hand, don't really have any goals. This just seems like a lot of fun. Okay, that's cool. If I were to invest in something that didn't have specific goals or was just fun, I'd call it a hobby, and I would limit my investments, right? If it's about marketing and standing out from the crowd, if it's about net new client acquisition, be really clear about what the goals are and then work backwards. So, okay, if my goal is to stand out from my competition, okay, how will I know if I achieve that? Right? How would I even know how to measure that goal? Oh, it might be I'm able to command a premium for the price in the marketplace. It might be people are coming to me more than I have to go to them. It might be that people come to me and say, hey, I saw that thing, read that thing, did that, whatever that you did, and therefore want to have a conversation. So being clear around the goals is first. Second thing is, who cares? Meaning, who is it that you're creating this thought leadership for? With a very, 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 I would start with a high level of specificity and thinking about connecting it to the pain points that you can solve. So don't, if I use leadership as an example, the worst response I get from a client when I'll ask them, hey, who is your content designed to really, really resonate with the most? Oh, everybody. Okay, well, newsflash, unless you're Google or Coca-Cola, you ain't got everybody, marketing dollars to market to everybody. I would rather hear business owners of a family-owned business, second generation, taking the reign, manufacturing in the Midwest. Okay, that might not be sexy, but I know how to create stuff to find exactly those people. I know the pain that they're in, and I know if I would talk to them and the formats and all that. So constraints actually lead to freedom, which is sort of counterintuitive.
Yeah. I think that becomes a real key is if you don't know who you're talking to, you're really not talking to anyone. We've heard that before, is that we've really got to niche down. In this day and age, we have those capabilities that we've never had before in the past. You have the capability to speak to a very specific niche and market segment. And it doesn't matter if you're a small business owner in a local market. You still have that capability of how are you speaking to them, no matter if you're looking to go worldwide and you want your products to go worldwide. I think one of the things that might be really interesting, Peter, if you wouldn't mind, and you don't have to share a name, but kind of how you maybe an example of someone that you've worked with and how you really walked them through that process and the changes that they were able to make in their thought leadership.
Yeah. Oh, so there's many. I'll give you sort of a hybrid of a couple combined to protect the innocent or guilty. So many of our clients come to us. They might not use these words, but they need a business transformation, a digital business transformation. What does that mean? It means they've been, there's only 3 ways to monetize content. Right? Number one, you do more of what you're doing as the creator of that content. You write more, you speak more, you coach more, you do more workshops. Ultimately, there's a cap there, right? There's only so many days in the week and so many hours in the day, whatever. Next thing that you do is you charge more for it. Okay, so now I want to be a premium brand. I don't want to be a commodity. How do I do that? Well, there's certain things that you can do in terms of writing, publishing, where you are, case studies, type of clients you work with. Great, okay. Now the next problem there is, okay, that's going to have a cap. So we're still capped by number of hours in the week, but at least we're charging, 3x, not 1x. Ultimately, our clients are somewhere between 1 and 2 and realize that, my growth is arithmetic. I can only do so many hours a week, so much per hour, whether I'm actually charging by the hour or the project or whatever, it's still, time for money. How do I grow geometrically, right? How do I grow astronomically? Well, the only way to do that is to scale your thought leadership and content, right? Where you are just one modality in the way that you deliver it. So how do you convert it into, and this is where it gets really cool and fun and creative and exciting, assessment tools, video-based training, apps, things that you can license, consulting instruments, etc. So the way that we work with our clients is say, number one, let's get really tight on the strategy, because in many instances, this hasn't been a business that traditionally required a ton of investment. So Gary, if you came to me with a deal and said, hey, Peter, I'm thinking of buying 5 acres of commercial real estate in this part of town and would you be interested? I'd say, I don't know, show me the numbers, right? So you show me the numbers and then I tell you if I'm interested or not. But the numbers are going to tell me what I need to know in terms of cost per square foot, occupancy rates, yield, ROI, all that kind of stuff. People, and the reason we would both be very diligent about that, there'd be millions of dollars at stake. It's not, hey, where do you want to go to lunch today, here or there? Minor decision. It's significant. When it comes to thought leadership, people don't go through the same rigor when they make the investments in their business. It just sort of happens. And then they wake up one day and say, whoa, I got to be the captain of this ship. This thing's going in directions that I don't even know if somebody programmed the GPS here. So strategy, brand and platform, productization, and then monetization. That's sort of our path.
Yeah. And I just love what you shared there, because it works for any business, because really, if you have a business, you are in thought leadership of being able to share that message of what we started to is, what is that piece that we have? Even if we're a small mom and pop store, you have that capability there. And then it's the courage to lead. Are you ready to take it to the next level? And what is that for your business, and what innovations do you need to come in your business versus staying the same? And then of course, then you go extinct, you go out of business in those areas. We've talked about some of this, Peter, but as we kind of wrap up, I think it really kind of sets the tone of our conversation is we've talked about some of that impact of COVID and the challenges we had. But really, I loved your philosophy. You said it really just kind of sped things up. So really, if I'm sitting here and I'm listening to this and I need to make some of those changes, what would you suggest for me as being a thought leader that I should really consider? And I know some of those things you've shared already, but what should I consider if I'm listening to this podcast and saying, okay, I know I need to make some of those changes, but how do I get started?
So, I touched on some of them in terms of, who the market is and the pain points, et cetera. The number one thing from a starting point is consistent. So I can tell you that when I started blogging, remember blogging, a dozen years ago, I went to a friend who had 4 or 5 very successful blogs at the time. And I said, I'm starting to blog, give me some advice. And he said, listen, here's what you need to do. You're an entrepreneur like everybody else. That's a polite way of saying you're impatient. That's a polite way of saying you want immediate gratification. That's a polite way of saying you're going to monitor the metrics like crazy to see, every blog you write, did it ring the cash register? Says you have to promise me that you'll commit to do 100. Watch the numbers along the way, but they mean nothing. I was like, oh my God, that's painful. It's like being on a diet for a year and not getting on the scale, right? And I'm like, all right, I trust you. And I did it, and he was 100% right. And ultimately there was so I was watching the numbers all the way. I didn't even know what the right numbers were or whatever. I don't particularly like writing. I don't think I'm a particularly good writer. I'm average on my best day, and I don't have that many best days, but I did it, and I knew who I was writing for, and they were sufficient. And we hit about 90 or 100, and it started to build a flywheel. When I launched my podcast a few years ago, I said, all right, I am impatient. I am an entrepreneur. 100 sounds big. I'll commit to 50, right? I'll commit to doing 50. And guess what? 2.5 years later, we've got over 250 episodes out, and it's achieved the business objectives which we've wanted, which were on the branding side and the net new client acquisition side. So I think it's that commitment, that consistency. And then the other piece is not being afraid to experiment, meaning, you know what, you might not like writing. I prefer podcasting to writing, because it's easier for me, as you may have noticed, to just talk than it is to actually sit down at a blank screen and write 800 words. So find your zone, experiment with different modalities, consistent.
Well, great advice there, because I've experienced the same thing with the podcast, and most entrepreneurs are not very, consistent, and it becomes one of the challenge. They're hard workers. They really will think of things differently, but they won't do the things that allows their business to really take off. And it's really, I tell people all the time, when you're getting in business, that first 3 to 5 years is a challenge. But it's
everything that you do is representative of you and the brand. So if I was going to go hire whatever, an SEO marketing person, whatever it was, right? And I go on their site and I see there's a blog. I'm like, oh, good. Let me hear what this person has to say. And the last post was from February of 2019. It leads me to believe this isn't someone that follows through. It leads me to believe that, and that might not be their intent. Now, they might have moved to other things. Okay, well, then adjust your website, kill the blog, and show me your podcast or your videos. But I want to see consistency, and I want to see, the balancing act there is it is more efficient to produce evergreen content than for you and I to be getting on a podcast today and talking about the scores of the baseball games yesterday, because nobody's going to care about that in 3 days, certainly 6 months.
Right.
So.
Great philosophy. Peter, share with them how, if they want to reach out to you or learn more about what you're doing, share that with them now before we jump into the recharge round.
Yeah, so the best place is to check out the website, which is thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And you could email me directly at peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com. And that goes actually to me, not some robot or offshore someplace. It actually winds up on my device, which is in my pocket 24/7.
That's right. And you'll respond to them. So there's some information. We'll have that in the chargepodcast.com and notes. So if you're driving or exercising or not where you can write it down, know that you can go to chargepodcast.com. We'll have that all in show notes for you. We're going to share the recharge round. I like asking every guest these same 6 questions, Peter. So we'll start off with, why do you believe your mindset affects your daily living?
Oh, it certainly does, because I think that we have been fed a fallacy, which is, it's about skill set and tool set. So if I want to develop the skill of being a better communicator, here's the tools to do it. If I want to develop the skills to be a better negotiator, here's the tools to do it. The problem is, the reality is that's sugar high, right? So you get this sort of car brush crash. You have to have the courage and the guts to say, what is my mindset around A, B, and C? Do I come from a place of scarcity versus abundance? And those are scarier questions than, let me try to learn a negotiation skill of offer 3 solutions. That's sort of tactical, but I'm all about the mindset.
Yeah, excellent. What do you do daily to bring energy in your life?
Like 5 cups of coffee. And then, doing what I love with a team that I love and with clients that I love.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing, I couldn't imagine. I see so many people with that gray face going, hey, how you doing? And then it's like 3 years, 7 months, 11 days till retirement. I don't know how people live in that place. It would kill me.
Yeah, I'm the same way. How about the number one connection or relationship that's made the biggest impact on your life?
Oh, that's a tough one. Number one relationship. I mean, it depends on the framework of that. I'll take the right answer, which is my wife. Is probably the only right answer to that.
There you go. Now you can let her listen to the podcast.
Exactly.
How about what advice has influenced you the most in your life?
What advice? I think, going for it. Like there are people that I talk to people, and you probably experience this as well, Gary, all the time, that are entrepreneurs or faux entrepreneurs, and they'll say, "Oh, I thought of that." Uber. Oh yeah, I thought about that 10 years ago. Oh yeah, I had the same. Oh, that guy. I was like, there's a difference between thinking and doing, and if you want to make a difference, it ain't from thinking. There's a time and place to think, but there's the Teddy Roosevelt quote about the guy in the arena covered in blood and mud and muck. That's where stuff happens.
Yeah. Yep. You got to take it from the thought to the action, and that becomes the real key. How about, you've got lots of them I see behind you, but share one book and why you love it.
Okay. So that's sort of a trick question based on my business because all of my clients write books. So I always default to one of my favorite books by a dead author, because you can't be mad at the dead author. But I would say In Search of Excellence by Viktor Frankl.
Oh, great book. Great book. Define in one sentence, what legacy do you want to leave the world?
Oh, that's a tough one. What legacy do I want to leave the world? I think that if you want it bad enough, you can do it.
Excellent. You want it bad enough, you can do it. And that's a message to every charger out there today that's listening to this podcast. If you want it bad enough, you can do it. Move forward, take action, make that happen, and take that thought leadership that you have into what you want it to become. Peter, we can't thank you enough for saying yes to becoming a guest on the Charge podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much, Brandon.
Share with them again, Peter, how they can reach out to you and connect with you.
Yeah, so it's peter@thoughtleadershipleverage.com is my email, and the website is thoughtleadershipleverage.com.
Chargers, I hope you check out Peter's information because he shared some information that really is practical for all of us. How can we move forward and take action on what we're thinking? All of us are having different thoughts of things that we could do, we could improve, we could get better at. Well, now, how could you monetize that and make that become your business? And that becomes the real key. So, Chargers, I hope you do that. And Chargers, come back next week and we'll have another great guest for you. Remember, like and share the podcast and let others know about it. And we'll be back next week. Thanks again, Peter, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Make it a great day, Chargers. We'll see you next week. Here is a short description of the book. Lloyd, a truck driver from Forward Trucking Inc., has a random encounter with death while making his way back home. Lloyd, who is short on faith and options, finds himself in the largest downward spiral of his life. He meets an unexpected traveler who sees something in him that Lloyd couldn't find on his own. Together, through a new sense of faith and reason, Lloyd discovers his life's calling. I'm so excited to launch this book with you, and I appreciate your help. To get your copy, go to cultivatepositiveculture.com. Thanks for supporting the book.
This podcast is ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.